So today on this episode of Lessons from an Old Quilt, I have a really cool quilt for you. My friend got this at an auction and she let me borrow it. After she showed it to me, I just fell in love with it and I asked her if I could use it for Lessons from an Old Quilt. Now I have quilts of my own to show, but I want to get this back to my friend Flo, so I wanted to get it recorded and out to you all so she can start the repairs and cleaning it up and actually using it. So she got it at an auction, like I said, and I'm not sure exactly how much she paid, but it wasn't much, and it is a really interesting quilt. But before we get started talking about this quilt, my name is Chris O'Neill from Sew the Distance. Thank you so much for joining me today for this episode of Lessons from an Old Quilt. So this quilt measures 60 by 83, so it's a nice size quilt. I'm not sure of the date. Some of the fabrics are very, very old. I would say even like the early 1900s, and some are a little older, maybe in the 1930s, 1940s. And it is a really cool quilt. So I'm calling this quilt Flo's quilt because my friend's name is Flo, and she was gracious enough to allow me to show it to all of you. So let's take a closer look at Flo's quilt. So like always, we're gonna look at the block first. So the block is here. Okay, and when you study it closely, you can see that it is a 9 patch that has cornerstones that was cut in half, and these two were added. So let me show you what I mean. I made a mock-up, which I've been trying to do for a lot of the videos with complicated blocks, and you can see that here. So it was a 9 patch originally, and then it was cut in half on the diagonal, and this was placed on the other half. So you get this look, okay? And what's really cool is you could get 2 blocks out of one 9 patch. You could cut it this way, right, and get 1 half here, 1 half here. But what's interesting is not each 9 patch has a match. So I find that fascinating. There are some that do. Actually, there are quite a few that do, but there are many that don't. So I'm not sure what happened to the other half of the 9 patch. Also, there is a mitered seam here, which I didn't do on my mock-up, but it is a really interesting block. And of course, they matched this band with the cornerstones, which tells me it was probably made at the same time because it's the same fabric. At first, I thought maybe there were extra blocks somebody came across and added this, but because these 2 fabrics match, I believe this entire block was made at the same time. Actually, even the muslin that they used for the background is the same too. So they set this on point, which we've talked about with other quilts. You know, you can see it was probably, or actually it was, put together in strips and then placed on point. So you get this almost like a basket, and I looked and looked for the name of this block, could not find it. If anybody knows the name of this block, please let me know. And then between each of these blocks is a solid fabric, and that's the same throughout, and it matches really nicely. So I don't know what happened to the other halves of the block, but I do find it cool that, you know, maybe they're out there somewhere in a, I don't know, a twin quilt or something. So the quilting on this is all hand done, and so is the piecing. So all of these pieces were pieced together by hand. There aren't many holes. There are a few stains, however, which because this is my friend's quilt, I of course didn't wash it, but I do think that she will wash it after she repairs some of these holes. Now let's talk about the holes. This is definitely a polyester batting in here that I can see. It's not cotton. It's also awful fluffy and spongy. So I think this quilt was put together later because I think this fabric is older than polyester, or at least a lot of it. So let's take a peek at the back. You can see the quilting much better. Okay, so you can see the quilting here. This is a solid brown black background, and the color isn't great on the video, but it's like a chocolate brown, almost like a milk chocolate brown actually, and hopefully I can get a better picture of it with better lighting. So you can see that the stitches are hand quilted and they're not super even, and they are in this cream thread. They also aren't super small, which I know is a thing for us as makers. But even though it's not what you would call like spectacular quilting, it's held this thing together for who knows how long, and it is a utilitarian quilting style, and I think it's really cool because you can see there's like almost like a secondary pattern where we see the quilting lines, and it just adds interest and makes it really neat. So the backing is, like I said, this brown fabric, and it's a one piece. I couldn't find any seams, and it is pulled around to the front for the binding. And you can see it was hand tacked down, and it just was really well done and very pretty. So when we flip it back around, we can take a peek at some of these cool fabrics. We have this wonderful stripe, and what's really cool about it is there's the number 368 here, which tells me this was a shirting fabric and maybe even a sample. We see this wonderful red and these beautiful blues and pinks and solids and mixed in with prints, and one of my absolute favorites is this red, white, and blue. It almost looks like it was a piece of a flag or something like that, and definitely a lot of shirting. I just love the idea that some of the pieces in the 9 patch were taken from old clothes, and there definitely is evidence to show that. And then of course these setting blocks are just so sweet with the yellow background and the orange and brown flowers. I just love it. So let's talk about what we can learn from this quilt. The first thing that I think we could learn from this quilt has to do with those quilting stitches. We sometimes as makers get hung up on those teeny tiny quilting stitches, and we really need to let it go. In fact, a lot of these rules that everybody talks about, we have to let go of. The quilting held this quilt together. And I'm going to say that again. The quilting held this quilt together. It kept it intact. It preserved this quilt. So is it stellar, and should it win awards and all of that crazy stuff that we tend to like think about as makers? Probably not for the quilting, okay? But it held it together and it served its purpose. And this quilt, I'm sure, was used and loved. There's evidence of that because of the staining on it. It is a well-loved and well-worn quilt. And that's really what matters with these quilts. Unless you're a show quilt person and you're really making quilts for a show, you know, get it together. Finished is better than perfect, and just get it out there. And personally, I think that this quilting is endearing, and that utilitarian quilting just adds to the overall beauty of this quilt. I especially love the design on the back, which takes me to my next point and my next lesson. When we're making quilts and we're thinking about the back, I know for me, a lot of times I like to use a matching color of the back or a neutral, but this maker embraced it and made this really cool pattern on the back with the white thread and those big stitches. It almost looks like Southwestern, the design, and I think as makers we need to think about that sometimes we just need to take the chance and break whatever rules there are or whatever they call as rules, and you know, make the back interesting too. Even with that solid fabric, it is still interesting because of the quilting design. And lastly, the final lesson that we can take away from this is if you don't have enough blocks, improvise, make a new block. We see that with these 9 patches. Now, I'm not sure what happened. Is there another quilt out there that matches it? Did the maker share the blocks? Were some of the blocks damaged so they couldn't use them all? I don't know, but I just love that not every block has a match. And I wonder, where are those matches? What happened to them? So maybe I'm weird like that. Well, we know I'm weird like that, right? But anyway, I always like to make up these wonderful stories in my head of these quilts, and that's one of them, is that someday I'm going to come across the other matching quilt to this. Let's hope so. That would be really neat. I'll definitely feature that if that happens. As always, thank you so much for watching. Please consider subscribing. It really helps me out, and it is free to do so. And I hope you have a wonderful week and take some time to sew. I'll see you soon.